Hello and welcome to another edition of Foreign Dispatches, the program that takes you around the world in 25 minutes. I'm Teniola Shoboale. On the program this week, Russia strikes Kyiv as Western leaders meet in Europe and pledge more support for Ukraine. Plus, we check in on the situation in Afghanistan following last week's earthquake, which killed over 1,000 people. Russian missiles hit the Ukrainian capital earlier this week, striking at least 2 residential buildings. The new attack on Kyiv came a day after the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from the eastern city of Severodonetsk, a major victory for Russia after weeks of fierce fighting, with the ongoing battles resulting in international food and fuel price increases.
Russian missiles struck the Ukrainian capital Kyiv on Sunday, June the 26th, a day after a key eastern city fell to pro-Russian forces and a major setback for Ukraine. Up to 4 explosions rang out in central Kyiv in the early hours in the first such attack on the city in weeks. 2 more blasts were heard on the southern outskirts of the city later in the day. The strikes also damaged a nearby kindergarten, where a crater pocked the courtyard. Life had been returning to normal in Kyiv after fierce resistance held off Russian advances in the early phase of the war, although air raid sirens regularly sound across the city. Meanwhile, on Monday, a Russian missile strike hit a crowded shopping center in the central Ukrainian city of Kremenchuk, killing at least 2 people and wounding 20. Kremenchuk, an industrial city of 217,000 people before Russia's February 24th invasion of Ukraine, lies on the Dnipro River in the region of Poltava and is the site of Ukraine's biggest oil refinery. The mall is next to a factory that Ukraine says was disused and could not be described as a military target. Russia says the strike was aimed at an ammunition store and it had not targeted the shopping center. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov also accuses the West of dragging out conflict.
The
Russian Defense Ministry has explained very clearly what actually happened. They, the Russian military, bombed a hangar where American and European weapons and ammunition had been brought. And as a result of the detonation of ammunition, an empty shopping center standing next to it caught fire. We have repeatedly commented on US and European plans to pump new and different weapons into Ukraine. The more they pump weapons into Ukraine, the longer this conflict will last.
The United Nations has condemned the wave of recent attacks in Ukraine as deplorable.
Any attack that hits a shopping mall is utterly deplorable. During the weekend in the capital, Kyiv was hit again and a residential building was damaged, with some people trapped in the debris. Missiles have also struck areas in the west of the country, far from the front lines. Fighting also continues in the Donbas region, where our humanitarian colleagues are facing tremendous challenges in reaching people who are facing increasing needs. The challenges are not only due to insecurity, but also to lack of access due to administrative restrictions imposed by the parties. We once again stress that the parties are obliged under international humanitarian law to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure.
Russia denies targeting civilians, but Ukraine and the West accuse Russian forces of war crimes in a conflict that has killed thousands, sent millions fleeing the Ukraine, and destroyed cities.
The Russian strikes on Kyiv came as Western leaders met in Germany for the G7 summit and reaffirmed their support for Ukraine and condemnation of Russia. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a key focus of the summit, with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressing the leaders virtually.
Leaders of the world's biggest developed economies meeting in Germany earlier this week pledged to support Ukraine as long as necessary and promised more sanctions against Russia.
Discussing all the topics that are on the agenda, especially staying united in supporting the Ukraine against the Russian aggression, and we understood that the policies of all our countries are very much aligned. And this is, I think, the good message, that we are taking tough decisions, that we are also cautious, that we will help the Ukraine as much as is possible, but that we also avoid that there will be a big conflict between Russia and NATO. And this is what is of essence, to be tough and thinking about the necessities of the time we are living in.
Speaking by video conferencing at the meeting, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged leaders to do everything possible to end the war before the end of this year and avoid the harshness of the Ukrainian winter that makes it more difficult to fight. Zelensky has openly worried that the West has become fatigued by the cost of a war that is contributing to soaring energy costs and price hikes on essential goods around the globe. The G7 has sought to assuage those concerns. In their final statement on Tuesday, Canada, France, Germany, Japan, Italy, the UK and the United States, along with the European Union, underlined their intent to impose severe and immediate economic costs on Russia and look into far-reaching steps to cap Kremlin income from oil sales that are financing the war, now in its 5th month. However, it left out key details on how fossil fuel price caps would work in practice, setting up more discussion in the weeks ahead to explore the feasibility of measures to bar imports of Russian oil above a certain level.
If and when President Zelensky and the Ukrainians decide it's time to negotiate or move forward to resolving, to ensure that Russia faces defeat in Ukraine, they need to be able to negotiate from a position of force, and that's why a position of strength, and that's why we are continuing to be there with humanitarian assistance, with significant financial assistance, including what we announced today, so that the government can continue to function, and also significant military assistance so that they can continue to hold strong against this illegal Russian invasion.
With G7 countries, we all share the same goals: to cut the oxygen from Russia's war machine while taking care of our economies and the economies of our partners. The EU will stand by the people of Ukraine for the long haul, to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity, and to strongly defend our common democratic values.
Leaders also agreed on a ban on imports of Russian gold and to step up aid to countries hit with food shortages by the blockage of Ukraine grain shipments through the Black Sea.
There are 22 millions of tons of grains that are currently blocked in the Black Sea, and that's why we are totally committed, and we are making a lot of efforts in support of Antonio Guterres and the United Nations in order to make sure that sooner or later, and I hope as soon as possible, an agreement will be possible in order to make possible for Ukraine to export through the Black Sea the grains which are blocked in Ukraine.
Meanwhile, during the two-day meeting, G7 leaders also detailed plans to mobilize $600 billion in funding for the developing world in a move seen as a counter to China's Belt and Road Plan. They also pledged to create a new climate club for nations that want to take more ambitious action to tackle global warming. The club will be open to countries committed to the 2015 Paris Agreement goal of limiting global temperature increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius and achieving carbon neutrality by 2050.
Away from the war in Ukraine, as international aid agencies struggle to provide rapid relief aid to earthquake hit Afghanistan, civil society groups in the country are mobilizing to step in and support the survivors. More than 1,000 people were killed and thousands more wounded. The Taliban government has called for international help as it struggles to help the survivors, many of whom lack essentials such as food, water and shelter.
Days after a massive earthquake killed more than 1,000 people in eastern Afghanistan, survivors have been busy salvaging what's left of their belongings. Last Wednesday's quake struck some of the most remote parts of the country, which has made reaching those affected all the more hard. Deep in the mountains in Paktika province, Minagul is one of those struggling to rebuild his life.
Our home has been destroyed. The women and children are here with me. We have no home, no tent. Women and children are living outside among the destruction. There aren't any toilets, nor anything else. There is no place for us to live.
Afghanistan's health ministry says thousands of people are in need of clean water and food. The UN has warned that cholera outbreaks are of particular concern. The situation is a real test for the Taliban, who seized control of the country last year following the withdrawal of US-led international forces. The hardline group has since been shunned by many foreign governments due to concerns about human rights. On the ground, the people of Afghanistan are looking to their leaders for help. Abdul Rahman is one of them. He says he lost 11 family members in the earthquake.
I am very sad. We want the government to build our houses for us. I am not hungry for food so much. That is not so difficult. Construction is difficult. We want help with this most, because it's the sun and heat now. Then winter will come. We are poor people.
The United Nations and several other countries have rushed aid to the affected areas.
Afghanistan was already reeling from decades of conflict, years of drought, the pandemic, and now this crippling economic crisis. So the earthquake to the east of the country has really added additional burden to resources, to food assistance, and this is why we appeal to the international community to please not to forget Afghanistan and please to continue to support the people here who desperately need your help.
Over 190.
Since the hardline Islamist Taliban took over in August, as US-led forces withdrew after 2 decades of war, international banks are wary of testing UN and US sanctions, leaving the United Nations and aid groups struggling to deliver enough cash to run operations.
The formal banking system continues to block transfers due to excessive de-risking, impacting payment channels and causing breakdown in supply chains. Around half the organizations who responded to OCHA's latest monitoring survey reported difficulties transferring funds into Afghanistan. So that remains a problem, compared to 87% of respondent organizations who said the same in October last year. So the direction of travel is positive, but the figure remains alarming. We've seen limited progress because of resistance, I have to say, by the de facto authorities. This is an issue that is not going to fix itself. Under UNAMA leadership, the underlying causes of the breakdown of the formal banking system will need to be addressed, and I know the mission is doing all it can to do so. In the interim, we need that humanitarian exchange facility to allow for transfers that we are seeing still challenged.
Afghan authorities are calling on international governments to roll back sanctions. They also want the freeze on billions of dollars in central bank assets stashed in Western financial institutions to be lifted.
The Islamic Emirate is asking the world to give the Afghans their most basic right, which is the right to life, and that is through lifting the sanctions and unfreezing our assets, and also giving assistance after destroying lives for 20 years.
Billions of dollars in Afghan reserves remain frozen overseas as the West pushes for concessions on human rights, particularly for girls and women. In particular, over girls' rights to education, after the group did not allow female high schools to open in March.
When Foreign Dispatches returns in just a moment, we shift focus to the issue of migration. At least 50 migrants found dead inside abandoned truck in Texas, and Spain lobbies EU and NATO for support to address migration. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us on the program. At least 50 migrants were found dead in an abandoned truck in Texas on Monday in what is said to be the deadliest human smuggling case in modern U.S. history. Those found alive, including 4 children, were taken to hospital. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador blamed trafficking and a lack of control at the U.S. border for the tragedy.
The discovery was made on Monday and is considered to be one of the most deadly recent incidents in human smuggling along the U.S.-Mexico border. The truck was found next to railroad tracks in a remote area on the city's southern outskirts. There have been a record number of migrant crossings at the U.S.-Mexico border in recent months, which has sparked criticisms.
Today, we mourn for those 51 immigrants who came to us to breathe that fresh air, but instead found death in the state of Texas, suffering in a van or a trailer from heat exhaustion. It's a terrible way for us to treat immigrants. The state of Texas has done just about everything wrong that I can think of. They participate in building a wall, which does nothing to protect our border. They have spent billions of our taxpayers' dollars, state taxpayers' dollars, on paying for the Texas National Guard at the border. And they throw innocent people, those that just lost their lives, just like them, they throw them in converted prisons down by the border. We dehumanize them. We make them, people think that there's something less than us, and they are not less than us. Instead of spending Texas dollars on a failed border security program, we should instead be using those funds to help immigrants. Spend those funds to catch the smugglers and the crooks that live right here in Texas that did what they did today.
According to officials, the survivors were hot to the touch and suffering from heat stroke and heat exhaustion. Temperatures in San Antonio, which is about 250 kilometers from the Mexican border, swelled to a high of 39.4 degrees Celsius on Monday. The city's police chief, William McManus, says a person who works in a nearby building heard a cry for help and came out to investigate. The worker found the trailer doors partially opened and looked inside and found a number of dead bodies.
We were able to transport 16 people. 12 of those are adults and 4 pediatric. All of them were conscious at the time upon transportation. The patients that we saw were hot to the touch. They were suffering from heat stroke, heat exhaustion, no signs of water in the vehicle. It was a refrigerated tractor trailer, but there was no visible working AC unit on that rig. We are currently putting those 60 members through critical incident stress debriefing. Again, we're not supposed to open up a truck and see stacks of bodies in there. None of us come to work imagining that.
It will not be the first time such an incident has happened in the United States. Back in 2017, 10 immigrants were found dead in a similar tractor trailer outside a Walmart, also on the city's south side.
And in Europe, according to officials, Spain is shifting its foreign policy towards Africa while lobbying the EU and NATO for support to address migration from the continent aggravated by the Ukraine invasion. Spain is used as a gateway to Europe by migrants from other continents, including Africa and Latin America. Although it's largely a transit country, previous jumps in arrivals have put its border resources under intense pressure.
They were trying to reach Europe, and some paid with their lives. The deaths of at least 23 people as they tried to cross into Spain's North African enclave, Melilla, on Friday, the 24th of June, is a grim reminder of the perils of migration that also include dangerous sea crossings. However, Spain is hoping a new strategy will help keep migrants from danger, according to the Foreign Minister, José Manuel Albares.
No podemos permitir que el Mediterráneo.
We cannot allow the Mediterranean, through Libya, Morocco and other countries, the Atlantic, the route between Africa and the Canary Islands, to become enormous tombs. where every year thousands of human beings die when all they aspire to is a better life.
Lo que aspiran es a una vida mejor.
Parts of Africa are facing a hunger crisis exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, which has disrupted grain exports. Moscow denies responsibility for the food crisis, blaming Western sanctions. Two diplomatic sources say that Spain, its northern neighbors, and EU officials are increasingly worried the situation will trigger chaotic migration from the Sahel and sub-Saharan regions. They say numbers are already on the rise. Even before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which it calls a special military operation, Spain's Socialist Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez had revived a policy mothballed by previous governments, according to the two officials close to him. It centers on working with African partners to contain migration and tackle root causes such as instability and climate change.
We are looking for good relations with all the neighbours around us and jointly managing phenomena that no one, not even the most powerful state on the planet, can deal with on its own.
At the NATO summit in Madrid this week, Spain pressed its case and asked for increased intelligence sharing, including on issues related to migration. It also wants to secure a commitment for better policies on hybrid threats, including the possibility that irregular migration is used as a political pressure tactic by hostile actors. The government has also sent a bill to Parliament that would mark a significant expansion of existing funding for migration control to 8 African countries. However, human rights groups and migration advocates say Spain's quest to outsource enforcement has put vulnerable people in the hands of security forces in countries with a history of abuses and heavy-handed policing. The deaths on Friday, which were protested in Madrid at the weekend, came after clashes with Moroccan security forces when around 2,000 people tried to cross to Melilla.
We are deeply disturbed by the deaths of at least 23 African migrants and the injury of at least 76 others as they tried to cross from Morocco into Spain on the 24th of June. We call on the two countries to ensure an effective and independent investigation is held as a first step towards establishing the circumstances of the deaths and injuries and any possible responsibilities, and to ensure that accountability is guaranteed as appropriate. This is the highest recorded number of deaths in a single incident over many years of migrants attempting to cross from Morocco into Europe.
A Moroccan official said that security personnel had not used undue force. The Moroccan Association for Human Rights and Spanish migration charity Walking Borders says the incident was a tragic symbol of European policies of externalizing borders of the EU. Hundreds of protesters have rallied in Madrid to condemn the death of the migrants. Demonstrators lay on the ground in a stage performance emulating videos that have emerged showing dozens of migrants lying on the ground, some bleeding, and many apparently lifeless.
And finally on the program, on a lighter note, let's head over to Tunisia to meet Noor Bendia, a trained architect who fell in love with drift racing after accidentally walking into a race. She is currently training for her first international competition and is the first Tunisian female drifter to take part in the event. She hopes to encourage other young women to become professional drivers. Take a look.
Clutching the wheel of a car, 27-year-old Noor Bendia floors the gas pedal and spins her car in chaotic circles. An architect by trade, Bendia says she fell in love with drift racing in 2019 when she accidentally walked into a race.
The first time I joined a car sports competition, it was 2015. It was a coincidence. I was walking by the event and heard the sound of cars, so I stopped and went to watch. It was love at first sight. It was a drift race. No matter how many races I take part in, drifting is the only thing that makes my heart beat faster.
The racer is currently training for her first international competition and will be the first female drifter from Tunisia to take part in the event. But the road getting here wasn't easy. Bendia describes facing stereotypes and disapproval from friends and family.
There is a stereotypical image of women that don't know how to drive. Whether you like it or not, in Tunisia, in the Arab world, and in the whole world, this image exists. People are shocked when I tell them that I race.
Recently, Bendaya and some friends founded Descent Diva, an all-female car drifting club. The group includes 8 members, 3 from Egypt and 5 from Tunisia. Drifting is a sport in which the driver intentionally oversteers, causing loss of traction while maintaining control of the car. The first drift competition in Tunisia was held in 2014, with men dominating the racetrack. Since then, more women like Bendaya are taking the wheel and joining the competitions.
Well, this is where we say goodbye till next time, but remember, our top stories are never far away. You can catch them on channelstv.com. Thank you so much for watching the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. Bye for now.